Thank you, Lindsay. Well, what's going on, Scotty? I like your sweater. It's
Thank you.
pretty ballsy. Yeah,
I like yours
like
too.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I also have, if it gets hot, you could call it tinso. I call it disco, but it works. It
what
was
was
one of
it?
those, I was following my wife around Nordstrom, making sure she didn't spend too much money. And I
I think
just,
I think Smith has earned whatever money she can spend at this point with you. So just
but
an opinion.
I grew up with my mom is first generation Ukrainian. We only buy things on sale with a coupon. And so I'm cruising past the men's part and I just see this shirt on the sale rack and it was like 80% off. Apparently, you would think in San Francisco there's enough guys who want a silver shiny shirt, but
It kind of looks like a spacesuit, like those
yeah.
or emergency blankets. It's turned it into a shirt.
Yep. But so, I kind of relish the opportunity to wear it. Not gonna lie.
Good.
And then
Was it hot? Was it sweaty?
the silver shirt actually breathes despite being so polyester, but I am very warm in this sweater right now. I'm kind of worried because this is a real fire that if
And
some,
aren't you guys having like firestorms down there right now? Isn't that the
well, it's California, but this is, obviously made in China. I did not wash it, so it's very fresh off the garment
that
manufacturing line with lots of lint.
like
So,
lead and rhodium or something on there?
so
Yeah, hopefully the fire department doesn't show up. So, all right, we are two past the hour, so we better get in a forward march here towards doing the show. Welcome everybody. Today, special guest Scotty Campbell. I think the last time I had you on Fireside Chat, you wore like a leopard print suit or something. So I
I
guess
did.
we're two for two and killing it here. But Scotty encouraged me to join the December festivities, and my most recent ugly sweater included some profanity. I don't know if you guys have seen the Christmas Vacation, but I'm wearing it with honor. But I did put the blue line through there for the innocent. Um, and Scotty obviously has got his festive Christmas balls and tinsel tops on. So, anyways, excited to have him back. And I don't know if you've been exposed to Scotty or not, but incredibly knowledge, a lot of fun, makes for a good combination. I've known him from a lot of years, and we've had some good times over the years, and done a lot of business together, which is also a great addition to the fun portion of it. But today we're going to be talking about optimizing stop loss for reference-based pricing, Christmas edition. And Scotty's going to get into all the details. So he's a wealth of knowledge. Um, this will be our last episode of 2024. So thanks for joining us throughout the course of this year. We do take January off, a little holiday, and then we'll get back at it in February. So with that, if you have questions, use that Q&A function on your Zoom browser. If you got comments, you can put it into chat, but I try to pull the questions out of the Q&A. So, all right, Scotty, what do you got? I guess we never did the introduction. Was there not an introduction slide?
Yeah, I
Was that as good as it gets?
think so. And what I tell people is I'm, very proud girl dad. I don't have a lot going for me. I'm short, balding. I'm growing less hair up here, way more on my back. I'm phonetically dyslexic, which means I can't sound out words. I literally couldn't read till about sixth grade when I had to learn to read a different way. I'm allergic to a power tool. Embarrassing to admit, I even hired somebody to put up Christmas lights at my house because my wife needs everything to look perfect. But I'm an expert in stop loss and all things self-funded. This has been my thing I've done since I graduated college 18 years ago. I worked at three different carriers, and now I've recently been promoted to executive vice president at Stealth Partner Group, which is an Amwins company. So that's my commercial on me. If you go next slide, Lindsay. I really like to always humanize this because I realize I'm a subject matter expert. Oh, did we get rid of our pictures? Is that next page? One more. There we go. Okay. So I'm surrounded by women. This is my wife and my two lovely daughters. I really wanted to have a a third girl, and my wife came home with a girl Bernedoodle. So this is when I'm not out here selling stop loss, full on out, immersed in being the best dad and husband and dog walker I can. So just a little bit about me. And yes, those are real fairy wings and moccasin boots in that picture. We were a fairy family for Halloween this year. If you go back, I just want to give a quick plug about
boots are a bit much, but good for you.
I don't shy away from an opportunity to dress up, as you can tell. So just a quick plug about my company, Stealth Partner Group. We're the largest stop loss wholesaler in the country. We'll have close to about 2.5 billion of stop loss premium we place after this 1/1. We have over 300 employees dedicated to all things stop loss. When consultants or third-party administrators work with us, we're an extra E&O layer. We work with all the largest stop loss carriers in the country and lots of niche players. We have some that only do RBP, one that only does unions, one that only does hospitals, one that only does program business. So when you have the book of business that we do, you have the opportunity to feed a lot of markets and act as a resource. And the big thing about us is our carriers, on the front end, we provide sales distribution. We have a TPA license, which we use to process premium and pay broker commissions. And then we optimize the claims process. We actually file, audit, and facilitate ACH deposits. So we're handling the claims from soup to nuts. So for that, our carriers pay us a non-rate impacting administrative fee. It is not an override, and there's no load to use our services. So that's just the quick elevator speech about us, and just had to put that in so you know. I think it's more than anything just to establish some street cred, if you will. And that's what I wanted to have on that slide. You want to skip to more, Lindsay? So every presentation I ever give at any conference or everything, I always bring up this slide. And full disclosure, I did not get permission from Telemundo to use this Pablo Escobar picture.
Oh.
College, which is take a slides. The first column there is the day then President Obama signed the Obamacare Affordable Care Act into law. And then I always update this presentation. I did these slides a week ago, and the important part on this day and March 23rd, 2010 is the government started regulating the margins, that profit margins our healthcare companies can make, health insurance companies. Most other companies in the S&P 500 do not have their margins regulated. If you ever look at NVIDIA or Facebook or some other Google's margins, they have 40, 50% margins. So it's kind of odd that companies can outperform the S&P 500 by 4 or 5x when they can only make a 15% profit. And at the end of the day, these carriers, which are partners of all of ours, not all of us all do RBP all the time, and they certainly provide value and all that, but they have a vested interest in getting 15% of a larger number. And so they need higher same-store sales. They need healthcare costs to go up if they're going to continue to provide outsized shareholder returns. So just a little tidbit. I think if you're ever explaining self-funding, or especially if you're trying to explain RBP, because we'll get into, there's no better lever you can pull to save money on your healthcare than RBP. I think it helps to start the story off with what the status quo somebody has is, and just where your money's going. I don't know if you ever use this stuff, but I think it's there. So there's a couple things, and I would say, despite my great outfits and good jokes that I want you to remember, there's some do's and don'ts that I wanted to start the presentation off with, that I want, if every broker consultant followed this, our whole industry would be better off, right? So the number one thing we want you to do is avoid stop loss claims that don't get paid. The number one reason why a stop loss claim doesn't get paid is because somebody does not have their eligibility and their leave ducks in a row. And you might think, oh, this might happen at smaller companies. The 5,000 employer companies I have, their leave is just as much of a mess as the 100 employee company. So what we want everyone to do is make sure you have your eligibility lined up in either your employee handbook or your plan document. I usually prefer it to be in an employee handbook, because when you make plan document changes, you have to send out notices. You can make employee handbook notices changes whenever you want. At my company, we do have a client-facing checklist that if I was a consultant or broker, I would make this checklist part of my pre-renewal meeting or implementation meeting. Go through these things, because if you get all these ducks in a row, you'll avoid 75% of any potential stop loss claim denials. I threw my email up on here. Realize there's not a capital S there, but if you email me, I will send you the guide. I won't ask you to jump on a sales call with me or anything. Just like I said, the whole industry is going to be better if you follow this guide. I always unequivocally want plan mirroring, and that's where, if you don't know what that means, in a stop loss contract, there are a set of exclusions that the stop loss carrier has, and those may be different than the exclusions or definitions that are in your underlying plan document. Your employer has a fiduciary, legal, financial responsibility to pay claims according to that plan document. When they're buying stop loss through their TPA, consultant, broker, they're in their minds, this stop loss is covering everything that's in there. And there could be a very small gray area or a very big difference in that. And when you get the plan mirroring rider done from a stop loss carrier, the stop loss carrier is saying, wherever there are conflicting provisions in my stop loss contract in your plan document, I'll toss away my stop loss contract, and I will instead defer to your plan document. So if it's payable in your plan document, it's payable under our stop loss contract. So whenever I'm placing stop loss, that is number one, gotta have. If you're doing things like reference-based pricing, you're a Health Rosetta broker, you're trying to be cutting edge, get away from the norm. Maybe you have things like direct primary care, you're doing international sourcing, PAP, those things. If it's outside the plan document, we see this most often with PBM solutions, where they're trying to have the best chance to get a drug from a manufacturer's assistance program, or they're just kind of doing some things. It's okay if it's not in the plan document. We'll get the stop loss carrier to cover, but we have to have it documented and all approved on the front end. You can't just jam these things down a stop loss carrier's throat. My other very, very important thing, I despise a 12-15 contract. This underlying plan document, a standard, and I've actually never seen really a plan document that doesn't have this, is a provider has 12 months from the date of service to submit a claim. So if your stop loss only has 3 months from the date the claim was incurred to be paid, your client has vulnerability there. And so I want you to have a 12-month tail. I personally don't, I have a preference, but either way, if you have a run-in tail, so you have a 24/12 or paid contract, or you have a 12/24, so it's a run-out contract tail, I just want you to have the 12 months. That's really essential. The way the math—
Hey, Scotty, on the run out side, I think this became more prevalent during the COVID component, or the years of COVID, where I think originally people were like, oh, balance bills are getting much lower, and then the reality was they just hadn't been processed because people didn't have staff to move through them, right? At least that's my theory, anyways. And you were seeing some of these things pop up, well outside the 12-month coverage, or at least outside the 6-month coverage. Did you see that same trend? What are you seeing today now that things are kind of balanced out? And any additional commentary here?
Yeah, we still see these claims trickle in here and there. If you have it, when you have this 3 months of tail, a 12-15, or you do a 12-18, you're going to capture 98% of the claims. But the ones that are that 2% that's hanging out there, it's usually a complex inpatient stay, and it's usually a lot of haggling going on. And what we advise clients to do is, in this last month or two of your stop loss contract, work with your reference-based pricing vendor, work with your administrator, get a report of pending claims or claims in dispute. And as long as you let the stop loss carrier know ahead of time, hey, these are still out here, and it's usually in the stop loss carrier's best interest for these things to lag on. The longer it takes to get a claim paid, the more desperate that organization is going to want to get their account receivables. They want to close their books. They don't want to be having money out there. You're probably going to get a lower paid claim. So the stop loss carriers, at least the ones we work with, especially the ones that understand RBP, they're going to be fine as long as they're notified. So we really strive to make sure we are doing that at the end of the policy. And I would say that that needs to be part of your process if you're selling RBP, is to, at the end of that policy period, really document these things, because we'll get carriers to cover them as long as we document it.
Have you seen, I mean, I know how we handle things from a reporting standpoint, which I'm proud of, but are there others out there that are struggling to produce the data to support that, or is the industry kind of getting on top of it now?
The biggest disconnect usually seems to be that the RBP vendor is not, the TPA is not capturing those outstanding pending claims or claims in dispute in any of their reporting. So if you're just doing your everyday blocking and tackling a stop loss, and you're providing the reports that a carrier needs, a trigger report, a case management notes, claim done, those aren't captured oftentimes in the system. And so you kind of need to take that extra step if you really want to cover your back. But I think it's less than we saw with COVID, but it's still very much a thing that you got to address, to your point.
Appreciate it.
Last couple points on here. I always want no new laser with the renewal rate cap. There are a lot of times taking a laser makes sense. At Stealth here, we do an annual study in our book of business, and the last 3 years in a row, only 20% of our members have ever hit their laser amount. People die, they get better, they exhaust their leave, and they go on the exchange or a spouse's plan. There's a lot of reasons. It's really hard to underwrite with data, say through September of this year, and plan what's going to happen all the way through December of next year. That's just a really hard gamble. Think of how hard it is for Vegas to get the spread right on a game, and they just have to worry about one game on a given day. And so that's hard, especially when there's maybe not a lot of claims information or details. So a stop loss carrier needs to protect themselves or cushion. And there's times where I say, hey, instead of taking a 50% rate cap, let's take a 20% renewal and let's roll the dice on some of these lasers. But I want that option. And so that's another protocol we're trying to get. And the last thing is, you need to make sure in an RBP environment, we're going to talk about this more in another slide, you establish what happens if a claim is going to get paid over 200% of Medicare. Whenever we market stop loss, the standard 6 degrees is it pays 140%, but they want the cushion to negotiate up to 200%. And the stop loss carrier price for that. So, it's kind of like you can do whatever you want as you're home by curfew, but if you're going to be home past your curfew, you got to call mom and dad. Same scenario here in a stop loss situation, is that if it's going to be over 200%, you can't just assume the stop loss carrier is going to cover it. You need to have a plan or protocol. Next slide.
Hey, I had a question come in here. You ready for a Q?
Please.
Q&A. All right. From Amber L. Any help with carriers who don't renew the rate cap in the following year's contract? ? We had 2 carriers attempt to do that.
Yeah, we're seeing that, unfortunately, more often than not. There is only one stop loss carrier I know of out there, and it's a little plug for Swiss Re here. Their no new laser renewal rate cap is a true evergreen. So their wording is they cannot remove it. With every other carrier, they have to honor it that next year, but they can remove it, or they can say, hey, we'll give you this no new laser rate cap, but Keith Potter and Scotty Campbell, who we're worried about having stem cell transplants, they're excluded at the next one. And that, unfortunately, is a challenge. You are a lot less likely to have that in an RBP environment, much, much less. And there's no kind of getting away from it. If you got some ugly ongoing claimant, it is what it is. What I would tell you is, on the flip side, if you were fully insured or you were bundled with a BUCA, you're going to have the same issues there. There's a famous Bill Parcells NFL coach who says, you are what your record says you are what your claims are, and you can't really unrun that. And that certainly is a challenge, and there's no silver bullet unless you go with Swiss Re, unfortunately. But that's the last comment on that is, as soon as Obamacare lifted, all stop loss and health plan policies used to have annual maximums and lifetime maximums, but they were usually a 1 or 2 million annual max and like a 5 million lifetime max. Now just the prevalence of claims over $1 million or even $2 million is just through the roof compared to what was even 5 years ago. But certainly once that maximum came off as part of Obamacare, it's out there. And I would say on my book of business, which is around 200 employers, around 175 million of stop loss that I personally manage, every year we seem to have a $4 million claim. So, you know, and if your stop loss premium is only 500 grand, the way the economics work in stop loss is the stop loss carrier is trying to make a 10% profit. They have 15% overhead for contracts, the cost of capital, reinsurance, premium tax, all that stuff. So 75 cents on a dollar goes to pay a claim. The average stop loss premium on my book is 600,000. So if you think about that, 600,000, they only make 60 grand. You have a $4 million claim. You're just never ever making it back in the black on that. And where if you're fully insured and you're making 15% of a $3 million fully insured premium, plus you're making money on all the rebates, like the economics for a fully insured carrier are vastly different than they are for in stop loss and self-funding. And that's why all large companies are self-funded, because it's the best allocation of capital. You are buying less insurance, but the stop loss carriers do need it out when the odds are that stacked against them, unfortunately. Next slide, Lindsay. All right, these are the don'ts. I feel like I'm dating myself. Technically a millennial, born in 1983, but when in my youth was the East Coast, West Coast rap war, and there was one of my favorite songs is Notorious B.I.G. the 10 crack commandments about how to sell slang drugs, and these are my stop loss don'ts. Okay, so don't ever sell 12-15, and even with possible, get away from 12-18s. Just every year we have claims fall outside. And usually when that happens, your client's left holding the bag, hundreds of thousands of dollars and millions of dollars. You get fired, and if I'm working on your stop loss, I get fired. And just this year, we had a 5,000 employer group with a $500,000 stop loss deductible, and they have a 12-18, and they had a $2 million claim that was paid in month 7. And the broker and I were both fired, and we even showed them at renewal, but the old CFO didn't want to pay 3% more for a 12-24 contract, and the client got left holding the bag with over 2 million of claims. So it happens even in the VUCA world. It actually happens more in the VUCA world than it does in RVP, to be honest with you. Don't buy aggregate insurance whenever possible. So I've worked at 3 stop loss carriers. Outside of taking a group from fully insured to self-funded with limited or no data, in that situation, you have more ag claims or in like a captive. But if you're 300, 400, 500 employees and you've been self-funded for 3 years, you're almost guaranteed to not have an aggregate claim. The way the math works out, you just can't. And my analogy to people is if you play blackjack and you're at the casino, they have the side bet, like you got to get 2 kings and they got to get suited and you get this big jackpot, but usually they're just taking that money away. And that's what aggregate is. Like the loss ratio on most carriers is like 9%, maybe 20% if you include their captive business on aggregate. So I don't want you to buy it. TLO is another waste of money outside of the first year. Stop loss TLO is very different than VUCA ASO TLO. VUCA ASO TLO kicks in if you just leave them, no matter where you go. Stop loss carrier TLO only works if you go back to fully insured. So if your clients bought into self-funding, they got to know this is a 2 or 3 year plan. I'd rather have you dump TLO and buy no new laser with a renewal rate cap and buy a 12-month tail. Those things you're going to use and protect you way more than TLO is. And the load for TLO is 10% on average for stop loss carriers. The load for no new lasers is around 9%. So just pay for something you're really going to use. My other rule of thumb is, listen, there are over 60 plus stop loss carriers out there. There's a low barrier to entry. That's why we have a lot of options, and it is easy to shop on price, but we all have claim issues that come up that are out of my control, the TPA's control, your RBP, just pardon my friends, but shit happens. And so if you can stay with the same carrier, my rule of thumb is it's worth 5%. And because once you have continuity and a partnership with the carrier, your chances of getting a claim paid that's in that gray area or even outside of the stop loss contract, your probability goes way up if you can show a level of partnership on your end. And then this last part that is the most important to me is, again, don't just assume the stop loss carrier is going to pay a claim over that 200%. You got to have that plan. I tell people, I think I maybe have another slide, but anytime I play stop loss and we have RBP, we create that plan. And I bat 1,000. I've actually never had a claim that has fallen outside of, that needed to get settled above 200% that we didn't get paid. But that's, we notify the carrier early in the process. Sometimes there are other RBP vendors out there that maybe they have a workers' comp thing or they have a direct contract. And I'm sure I've even done it with 6 Degrees where some other RBP vendor couldn't come in, but 6 Degrees had a direct contract. We took advantage of that. They received a fee for it and we got the claim settled. And push comes to shove, the stop loss carrier just wants to see you didn't get rollover. You stood up to the bully on the playground. And if we, at the end of the day, have some provider that just double middle fingers us and we got to settle for 20% of bill charges, at least we went toe to toe in the ring before we got knocked out, then the stop loss carrier is going to pay. But they don't want you to just lay over because somebody wrote a letter to the member and scared the member. Like, don't let the providers bully you into a bad deal. Any questions or comments on that? All right. Okay, next slide, Lindsay. Okay, so again, we work with all stop loss carriers. I started my career with Sun Life, worked at a company that was then bought by HM and then also Berkeley. And so what I would tell you is the big 5 stop loss carriers are, I have RBP business with pretty much everyone that's on here, but they're not the strongest at it. The carriers I highlighted in green are my go-to carriers. These are the carriers that fundamentally have made the effort to understand RBP over the year. Some of them, like one carrier, Izzy, and another one, Evolution Risk, they have actual contract riders that extend the paid period 12 months for any RBP claim so that it allows it to be in dispute. But these are the carriers that are going to be there to on the front end for pricing, but they're also going to be there to work through those claims situations. And it's not why these carriers have by far the most people. We can help you with that, but your standard Sun Life and Voya's gotten better, but still, just those carriers, because they have so much business in the BUCA world, they haven't needed to understand these other markets where some of the other scrappier carriers needed to find a way to still write business and compete against the Suns, the Voyas, and the HCCs. And that's who I think, in my opinion, are the best. But really the only carriers that won't write reference-based pricing are the BUCA-owned stop-loss carriers. So that's no Optum, no WellPoint, and obviously, BUCAs themselves, but these are kind of my go-tos for that.
Yes. Never say never. I know we've got at least a group or two with at least a couple of those, but definitely not the norm. Hey, I know you're trying not to plug yourself, but I find myself going to you with people looking for assistance in this space. I mean, you've got access to all kinds of carrier options. What do you do that helps facilitate getting these people to the right carrier for RBP?
The big thing is usually PBM doesn't come into play. These carriers do want to know about your PBM. These carriers, we spell out on our RFP exactly what's going to happen, not only with how the claim and the plan doc is going to be written, but then how is your RBP vendor being paid? Woo. Sorry, that's a real fire behind me and a log.
You almost catch you on fire?
Yeah. So to answer your question, where I was going, these carriers, they will rate based upon how the RBP vendor is, how their fees are paid. So if your RBP vendor is working for a per employee per month fee, we're going to see better stop loss pricing. If your RBP vendor is working for a percentage of savings, a percentage of bill charges, which is common for some players in the space, that becomes payable on the stop loss contract. So for example, if you have $1 million claim and the RBP vendor is working for 10% of bill charges, and they take that $1 million claim and they settle it for 200,000. Well, it's 200,000 plus 10% of $1 million. So now we have a $300,000 claim. Even if they got a little better RBP deal than, or they'll claim they get a better RBP deal than somebody who's working for a PEPM. If that RBP, a different RBP vendor got a claim for 250 grand and they're working for a PEPM, yes, then that claim that ends up being a better deal for the stop loss carrier, 250 versus 300 in my example. So that does really play into it. So those are all factors we're bringing, and we just at this point have done, like for me personally, I have 75 reference-based pricing groups, so we just know who's got an appetite for what.
Yeah, I mean it is amazing how the fee schedules, which we offer both options, because we used to primarily do PEPM, but you would have folks insist and or request the percent model, so we do offer it, but we've always seen a better underwriting on the PEPM programs.
Yep. And what I saw the question that just popped up. What I would prefer is there to be a cap of, if you're going to do it, cap a claim at 50 grand for an inpatient, outpatient. Usually it's 25 grand. Those are the most common caps. And when a stop loss carrier does see that, it significantly impacts the pricing. It's just so easy to have, like the average I live in California, the average Anthem discount is like 60% off bill charges. So the hospital has a perverse incentive to have the highest bill charge so that at 60% off a bigger number, they arrive at their net claim cost. So if you're working for a percentage of bill charges, all of a sudden that ends up being really, you can have some claims, you can have a $2 million claim. I don't know if they're really doing $200,000 of negotiating. I'm not here I want everyone to make money. And at the end of the day, even if you do pay those fees, when you look at those, the bottom line of what an employer is paying, even with those high bill charges fees, it's still going to be savings off of a BUCA. But I'm talking about it from a stop loss lens. That does help with the pricing.
So there's a couple comments that came in. One kind of made me laugh, but you guys can all read that. Okay, here, who do you think gives the most appropriate credit for cost containment, care navigation, aggressive pre-auth, RX solutions, etc.?
So oftentimes, if you're doing reference-based pricing, you're getting at least a better stack of those solutions in terms of prior auth, utilization management, case management. All of those things are a better set than what comes bundled with a BUCA. For instance, if you were to have a client with a TPA and they're using the Cigna network, you have to use everything Cigna. Same if you do UMR, everything is United. Unless you're a few thousand employees, it's really tough to do that. Some carriers give a pricing decrement for Accolade or Quantum, but that's really where it ends. So I think the stop loss carriers are embedding in their pricing, when they do RBP, built into their pricing automatically assumes those things, because you don't have it's really hard for a stop loss carrier to justify giving a further discount off RBP for one utilization vendor or case management vendor than the other. What they would tell you is it's going to show up in the experience. There are a few exceptions out there. For example, AIM, some stop loss carriers do give a discount for her. Nurse Deb, where we do see more and more stop loss carriers starting to give you a discount is if you have international sourcing and a PBM that is not one of the big three. But I learned from a broker of mine, his name's Byron. Hopefully he's on this. He usually watches the Firesides. I know after he got his PBM certification, he told me he learned there's I think 28 different ways the PBM can make money. The stop loss carriers aren't set up to review a PBM contract and compare it to another PBM contract. And even the same PBM may give a different contract to one group than they give another. So at the end of the day, as long as you don't have one of the big three, if you have a PAP or a MAP program, whatever you want to call it, and international sourcing, those things the stop loss carrier will do. If you make a strong case that some other point solution is going to give you this discount, usually what happens is the underwriter will, on that individual account, they will use more of their discretion. So what happens behind the wizard's curtain is the stop loss carrier, we get the census, the claims data gets plugged in, and a manual rate comes out. And then the underwriter has the ability to discount up to 40% of that manual rate, or they increase it depending on experience or these other factors. So if we tell them you have this a stack of aggressive cost containment vendors, maybe instead of discounting 20%, they'll go 25%. But really, we're going to get into how the math works on RBP in a general. Just right off the bat, just because you're flipping to RBP, you're getting a huge discount compared to any BUCA network.
All right, one more. It's kind of a statement with a question mark, but I think you can expand. I'm predetermining how you could go about this. A little bit of RBP and a little bit of network in terms of this question. I didn't know that the stop loss carrier pay the percent of claim fee, or maybe not in the BUCAs. But so there's, why don't you hit on this, because you've probably seen it in both. There's the RBP component of this with fees at a percent, but there's also percent within a network when you talk about out of network claim too. So maybe hit on both sides.
There's both. So for if you ever look at your TPA, and if you have a Cigna network or whatever, your TPA will say, hey, any claims that are out of network, they're contracting with an outside vendor. That vendor charges 15 or 20%. Because the TPA brought it, integrated, connect the pipes, they put a VIG on there. So it's usually about 25 to 30% of savings that somebody charges for out-of-network claim negotiation. The same that happens for subrogation. So you have somebody that's a car accident, they go at fault, the stop loss carrier gets, the subrogation vendor gets paid first, then the stop loss carrier, then your client gets their money back. So sometimes people are pretty upset when they see what the award was from subrogation and then what actually trickles back to their client. One of the worst, and no offense to anyone who loves them some Aetna on here, Aetna, if you have any Aetna ASO agreements, you will see they charge this fee called a MAP fee, and it's 50% of savings. So if they go ever do something and negotiate, they charge 50%. The self-funded industry has a standard of 25%, and most stop loss contracts will consider a cost containment vendor's fees as eligible under the stop loss, and they put a cap of 20% of savings up to, some have no cap, others have 25% of savings up to like 50 grand that they'll pay for a dialysis vendor, subrogation, out of network claim negotiation. If you have any Cigna level funded, I highly encourage you to go to the last tab on your Cigna level funded. It's an Excel. You need to get the Excel quote. And on the last tab, they'll have all of these terms and conditions. Woo! You will see how much Cigna is making some money. Cigna has their own network they own of behavioral health and mental health, and they charge a 30% savings on sending you to their own in-network. Like, there's the devil's in the details on your TPA contract and your network contract. So it's not just RVP vendors who are making, that's a very standard industry thing. Sorry, I get all hot and talk about Cigna level funded. Just the savings opportunities at every level of the ecosystem are just, as long as you can explain to your client how they don't need 110% claim corridor, we're going to have admin savings, PBM savings, stop loss savings. And if we do RBP, then we're going to have even more savings. Next slide.
All right, we got another question that came in. I know that just a time check, we're at 11:38. So a lot of the backside Q&A is probably getting mixed in right now, but this just means that you're fascinating the audience, not only with your wardrobe, but with your knowledge base. So, okay. Anonymous attendee signed by Insurance Dad. What is the best way to keep the member calm and ultimately whole in a high dollar RVP disputed claim?
Yep. I think it's kind of a question for you. I'd defer that back to you. To me, you need to let the vendor know why this is important, because if their employer has to go back to the BUCA world, it's going to mean way higher deductibles, way higher out-of-pocket costs, and less money for them to spend on whatever else they want to do in their life. They're going to spend it on healthcare. And then you need to educate them on why their provider, because usually whenever these settlements are out, do you educate the member and just say, hey, if you were just on Medicaid, or if you were 65 and on Medicare, your provider would accept half of what we're trying to settle them for. You can get them pretty angry about the situation, but it takes education. People have to understand why you're fighting this battle and why it's advantageous to them and their company and their fellow coworkers, is my opinion. But
no, I think you're spot on. I mean, I typically try and keep these things industry knowledge level, but I can't speak for all the solutions out there. But I know that with 6 degrees, if we're just talking about a balance bill and the way that this question is worded, then we've got kind of two different paths you can take. You have our traditional solution, which would be a negotiation up to a threshold, assuming that threshold is being surpassed based on this question. And I think that's where people start to get a little bit nervous. Are you going to authorize to go above 200%? You can put it back on the employee. How are you going to handle it? And a lot of our clients like having that control. Most of the new business that I sell with what we call MediShield, which still keeps that function in play. But once you get to that threshold, let's say it's 200%, it automatically turns into a legal play that is proven to be very successful over the course of that product. So we've got a 95% success rate, no additional payments made on that. So it's very effective. It does impact the overall claim experience for the plan. I think that product runs at the latest book of business, I think, has it at 138 or so. So it's very effective. It does come with an additional cost. It's all prepaid legal, but it's minimal compared to some of the alternatives out there that are percent models.
Yeah. So if you have to all of a sudden settle for, if they got it at 190% of Medicare versus you settling at 300%, you probably covered the fee for the year on that one claim.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think that part's worth it. And I tell people all the time that it comes down to you, the consultant, having to educate. You can't just educate people at the open enrollment. You're drastically changing the way people purchase and use healthcare for the good, but that takes a lot of education. I would encourage you to have an amazing communication strategy. And you got to also educate HR, because as soon as the inmates start complaining to the warden, things change. And so you just got to keep everyone involved and let HR know, when this comes here, here's how we solve that problem. And you need to make it so that HR is just passing the buck, and then people are communicating and solve the problem. If you do that, you're going to have a good RVP plan. If you fail there, people are going to be inclined to go back to a BUCA environment.
Yeah. Well, I think about my own family. We run, it's just 6 degrees runs its own RVP plan. My kids are on it, my wife are on it, and I'm obviously on it. But we've had some balance bills, and we run the MediShield solution, and I've used it, and it runs really smoothly. It takes over everything, and you don't have the back and forth. You typically don't have a lot of the threat letters that come in. But having a conversation with my wife, she's like, it's kind of can be kind of frustrating. I was like, well, let's remember, the benefits of this. And you think back on all the years of saved claims and reduction in what our contributions are for the health plan. It's huge. It's a huge win for employees. It's a huge win for the plan. But I think as an advisor, I think we have to remind people the successes that RBP brings, not just focused on the one problem, the 1%. So
let's go to the next slide, Lindsay. There's one thing I really want to go over on the pricing here. So this is again, I don't use nothing's ever original, right? This is a slide from one of my key RBP carriers, and they're just showing you how many groups where they have a bad loss ratio versus a good loss ratio, and how many times they have claims over 500,000. And most stop loss carriers, they reinsure claims above 2 million. So the really big ones buy no reinsurance, so they reinsure at 4 million or higher. So where they take the brunt of that punch on the chin is up to the 2 million. So you can see what happens on the number of groups they have with RBP versus a PPO and claims over $500,000. Go to the next slide. So this all ends up coming into the pricing, and I go back to that lever. So when we're comparing an RBP quote with those carriers in the green historically compared to a BUCA network, we're going to see that 25 to 40% of savings. You end up getting the most on specific, because if you think about a specific claim, most of that is a hospital claim, and that's where RBP has the biggest impact. And what happens in a BUCA network, you may be going in network and they get 60% off, but they all have outlier provisions. And so once a claim hits a certain amount or a certain number of bed days or a certain number of DRGs, they're all different. The network discount gets a lot crappier. It ends up being like 20%. And we never have that in RBP. So the stop loss carriers that understand RBP, they're salivating. They want more RBP, and their RBP blocks every year run better than the BUCAs. And it's just because of impacting those network claims. On aggregate, you don't get as big of an impact, because if you have $1 million claim and you have $100,000 specific, only $100,000 of that counts towards the aggregate. 900,000 of that is the carrier's money on spec, and that's where they get the big discount. So just the amount of claims below a specific of in the pie chart, so many more of those are outpatient, physician, or RX claims, where you're not seeing as big of an impact. So there is a differentiator, and it's just all about, you got to follow the money. And this is, I think, a really powerful slide. It's not about that savings year one. If you look here at the bottom, it's what happens year after year at renewal. And if you were just to map out getting a 10% increase with a Buka network, which we should all be happy about, or a 5% increase, I think here I used, it was 8%. I used the math. You just compound that over 5 years, where your rates will be RBP, stop loss wise, RBP compared to a Buka network, there's going to be a 40, almost 45% delta. It's just math, guys, and it's just money and math, and that's how it works out. So I always encourage people, when they're talking about self-funding, don't make a benefit decision based on 12 months. Everywhere else in your business where you're spending millions of dollars, you have a 3 or 5 year plan. If you're opening a plant, you're going to create a new product, expand your sales force, whatever it is, you plan that 3 or 5 years out. You need to do the same with your second largest line item on your balance sheet, your benefits. And so let's map out where this pricing goes 5 years from now. And that's where the savings are just going to be a huge number. And if you show that to a CFO or a business owner, and you could say, hey, 5 years from now, if I could save you $2 million, let's not worry about the 200 grand we're spending now. Let's talk about the $2 million. We'd all hit up Michael J. Fox, jump in the DeLorean, and we go right back to the future and sign on the dotted line right here. And that's just my advice. If you go to the next slide, this is what people end up coming and getting really angry at me sometimes, because when there is those bad member experiences, or HRs wants to throw in the towel, when you, because you took that discount here, what happens at that renewal when you try and go back to the old ways? It's very painful. So if you got a 25% discount and then I need to come back a year later, it's a 33% more, just because of the way the math works, especially if you add in trend. If you had the Cigna network, which we're going to get, of any of the Bukas, we're going to get the biggest discount on RBP compared to them. We're going to be more on the 30 to 40% on average, where the Blues are going to be more on that 20 to 25%. And then the math is even more painful to come back from. So that's what people need to understand when we go back to that one other person's question of, why is the pain worth it? And it's worth it because of how much money is at stake here, and what that does to cost shift, and what it does to just a company. I don't want you to spend more money on healthcare. I want you to spend less. Every other business, I'd rather have you reinvest into your business, or if you're a family, reinvest into your life and not spend it on healthcare. It's just a bad use of capital, and that's our problem in America. All right, we really wanted to get to these two slides. I don't even know if there's another one, but
you got looking at the cheat sheet, you've got 2 slides to go and 12 minutes to do it in.
Yeah, we talked about this earlier. I've never had a stop loss claim that I don't get reimbursed that falls outside of the 200%. And it's because we have that path. So if your takeaways from this or anything, it's on the front end, get your leave all wrapped up and work that out with your client. It's actually going to save them money. You don't want people hanging out on your plan. That's you're then being selected against. And then we want to make sure you have a plan in place, because in RBP, it's going to happen at some point. We're going to have a claim that needs to get paid over 200%. Over that 5-year period, we're going to have a handful. So what is our plan to action? And if we do our homework on the front end and set it up, we're going to have a great success. The analogy I give people is, if I set proper expectations with my wife, things are a lot better. If I tell her I'm going to be home at 7 and I get home at 7:30, she is pissed off. If I tell her I'm going to be home at 8 and I walk in at 7:30, I'm getting a big hug and a kiss, and we're going to have a good night. So anyways, that's how I try to set it up here is, let's set some expectations. Let's get your employer set up. Let's let them know what happens when this happens to the member. Let's let them know what happens when we have a claim over here. And let's just set everyone's expectations properly. And if we do that, we're going to set ourselves up for success. Last one. Just questions. Okay. Any other questions or fashion advice?
I'm just curious, does Smith ever expect you home by 7:30? Is that
Yeah, she hopes by 7:30 a.m. I better be waking up next to her.
all right, there you go.
She knows your boy
There you
likes
go.
to dance on the dance floor and drink tequila.
Yeah. Anybody have any other questions? We have 10 minutes left on here. Or Scotty, you have any additional thoughts you want to throw out there, things that you've learned over the years? I mean, I know that you've probably seen every angle of the different cost containment solutions. You've probably seen some come and go and some stick around.
I tell you, when I'm talking to consultants most often and they say, hey, I got to save client for money for my client, and I bring up RBP, don't be afraid of it. And dude, how often somebody tells me, oh, RBP doesn't work in our market. We have a provider there. Listen, there are a lot of laws and there are a lot of lawsuits that have been won. You know, we need to thank ELAP for fighting some of those early battles. And as soon as we get lawyers involved, things change. So somebody may puff their chest and, you know, be tell a big story, but don't be scared of it. Talk to your RBP vendor on the front end, ask what they have done with providers in that situation. And what I've found is that in any given network city, as long as you're not in too rural of an area, there are multiple health systems that are competing against each other. And if you're on a Buca network, Cigna or Aetna is not saying, hey, hospital A, I'm going to bring you revenue. They're just saying, I have 1 million people here. You better be in network for me. But those hospitals are in a fierce competition with each other. So if we do have an environment where we don't think a hospital is going to play ball, let's go to the other hospital and cut a direct contract. And we'll say, hey, we'll build it in our plan design that members, if you go to hospital A, you'll have no copay and deductible. If it's far away from you, we'll build into the plan that you can call an Uber Black, because guess what? It's going to be cheaper to pay $250 for them to show up in a black car to their doctor's appointment or their hospital visit than it is for us to go settle with this other provider. And as soon as you can then show some other hospital how many more bed days you drove to their competition, they're going to be willing to play ball at renewal. And it doesn't have to be all RBP. We have more and more groups that are offering an RBP plan and a network plan side by side. I live here in California. Gas is almost $5 a gallon. Every Saturday and Sunday, I live around the street from Costco. It's a 30-minute line. People discount what people are willing to do to save money. And if you wait in that 30-minute line on a Saturday or Sunday at Costco because you saved $9 for your gas for the week, what kind of pain or things would you be willing to endure to save $1,000 a paycheck? Or when you go to use your healthcare, you don't have to pay a $10,000 family deductible. You pay $1,000 deductible. I think we underestimate what our members would be willing to do to have a couple $100 extra in their paycheck every month. And I think we should at least give them a choice. And if you go to any TPA that does RBP, they probably have the Cigna network. You can offer a Cigna plan with as little as 25 employees. You can go to UMR and offer an RBP plan with UMR owned by United Healthcare as the administrator. As long as there's over 200 enrolled employees, no minimum to be on UHC or the RBP plan. So there are a lot of options out there. We give consumers choices in plan design, who to go see their doctor or their dentist. Let's give them an option to vote with their paycheck. And on those plans that I have, we usually start off around a 50-50, and every year we see more and more enrollment in the RBP plan. As soon as fear is eroded, where there's a good experience and people are talking about it at the water cooler, we see that migration to the RBP plan. We don't see a migration to the network plan.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal point. And we see more of that as well. One of the questions I hear when we start talking about a dual option type environment is, how does the underwriting work on that? We've got a few minutes here. Anything you want to add there?
Yeah, what I prefer to do, the same way in a fully insured world, you have an PPO network rate set of 4-tier rates and a set of 4-tier rates for your high deductible plan. I do the same. So I work with the stop loss underwriter and I say, hey, give me a rate assuming all the employees on a Cigna plan and give me a rate assuming all the employees on an RBP plan. We give those to the broker consultant. They create their fully insured equivalents and their contributions off that. And then that way we have them. And so the only thing that can sometimes get challenging is a TPA has trouble on the aggregate reporting, just having two things, but we can work through that. At the end of the day, don't let that be a barrier to entry. And then every time a new hire comes on, the billing is adjusted accordingly on a monthly basis. I think it's the cleanest way to do it. And I actually like it when the TPA provides me 2 separate claim reports, because we can see how the money is flowing, and they'll be able to see on a per unit basis, think like a CFO, on a PEPM basis, how much better my RBP plan runs than my network plan. And then we can get momentum within the organization to be advertising and consultative about getting people to RBP. But I like the opportunity for the math to do the talking. And so that's how I prefer to set it up. I do not like a combined composite unless we have to, because then it's hard to do the tracking. And it's also harder for people to see. The stop loss carrier is going to tell you when we show those two, we're going to see that big difference in pricing, the 25 to 40%.
Awesome. Okay. Question for you. Your 2-part question. Favorite holiday movie?
Elf, hands down.
Oh, that's good.
I grew up in Chicago, so I do love Christmas Vacation, but I think Elf is like the most original comedy, one of them of all time. I just can't get enough of it.
Yeah, you just hit two of my top favorites. We always watch Christmas Vacation yearly. That's the sweater, but yeah, Elf's a solid one that you can watch with the kids too. But okay, and favorite Christmas beverage?
I made the switch during COVID because I got really fat, and I learned, we got a nutritionist, that I can have 3 tequila sodas for 1 beer, and it's like 3.5 or 4 for an IPA. So now these days, I'm just pretty much tequila or red wine.
Look at you, maturing Scotty. I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. All right, guys, that wraps up the December Fireside Chat series. Scotty, phenomenal, always entertaining, incredibly educational. Guys, you can go back and watch these. If you go to our website, hit the button on the top left of the screen. It will take you to cost containment webinars, and you can watch this one over and over again. We are taking January off, and we'll be back in February. So we will see you sometime in February. I don't know. Maybe we'll do a Valentine's Day edition or something. Scotty can come back with a roses and hearts on a suit or something. I don't know. All right, guys. Take care. Everyone have a great holiday. Appreciate it. See you, everybody.